Deep in the desert, ancient water reservoirs still work perfectly today. These structures from vanished civilizations hold secrets that modern engineers are only now beginning to understand. This video will show you exactly why these millennia-old designs often function better than the concrete dams we build now. You will discover a set of forgotten principles that could completely change how we manage our most precious resource. How did cultures without computers create systems that run for centuries without any power? And what crucial piece of wisdom did we lose when we switched to concrete and steel? What does it truly mean to build something that lasts? A desert does not give its water away easily. In these vast, sun-scorched lands, rain is a rare and dramatic event. It does not fall in gentle showers but arrives in sudden, violent bursts that flood the dry earth. Then, just as quickly, the blazing sun returns, pulling that precious moisture straight back into the sky through relentless evaporation. The very ground itself can be an enemy to water, with sandy soil that drinks deeply but holds nothing, letting liquid life drain away into the deep, unseen darkness below. This is the environment that ancient engineers faced. They could not simply dig a hole and call it a reservoir. They had to think differently. Their first, and perhaps greatest, insight was to stop seeing the desert as a problem to be conquered. Instead, they observed it, learned its rhythms, and chose to collaborate with the landscape itself. They asked not how to bring water to the desert, but how to convince the desert to keep its own water. This required a profound, localized understanding. They mapped where the water naturally wanted to flow during a storm. They learned which slopes shed water fastest and which rock formations could naturally guide it. They understood the microclimates, the shady valleys where evaporation was slower, and the impermeable clay layers that could form a natural bowl. This was a holistic kind of engineering, one that saw the entire watershed as a single, interconnected system. Modern designs often rely on brute force, moving unimaginable amounts of earth and pouring concrete to impose a standardized solution onto any landscape. But the ancients worked with a light touch, enhancing what was already there. They did not fight the desert's nature, they used it, and that fundamental shift in perspective made all the difference. That deep respect for water transformed engineering into a form of stewardship. For these ancient societies, a river was not just a moving body of H2O. It was a life-giving spirit. The rain was a blessing from the heavens. This sacred perspective meant that every decision about water was made with reverence and a profound sense of responsibility to future generations. The goal was not to dominate the water, but to form a lasting partnership with it. This philosophy is physically embodied in structures like the vast underground Qanats of Persia. These were not just tunnels, they were breathtaking feats of precise engineering, gently tapping into mountain aquifers and guiding the water for miles across the desert with only the power of gravity. Building a Qanat was a monumental, community-wide effort that could take years, even decades, but it was an act of faith, a gift to one's children and their children in turn. The same spirit animated the magnificent Stepwells of India. These were far more than simple waterholes. They were intricate, multi-story monuments carved down into the earth with ornate staircases leading to the water's edge. They served as cool, subterranean temples for worship, as bustling community centers where people gathered, and as reliable water sources during the hottest months. Because the entire community relied on and revered these structures, they were meticulously maintained. Each generation felt a duty to repair and preserve them, ensuring they functioned for centuries. Compare this to the modern mindset. Today, we often speak of water as a commodity, a resource to be extracted, controlled, and billed. It is a problem of hydrology and infrastructure, solved with pumps and concrete. This shift from a sacred relationship to a transactional one has had profound consequences. When water is just a resource, the incentive is to get the most of it for the lowest immediate cost, not to ensure it flows for 1,000 years. This ancient philosophy of reverence was the bedrock. It gave rise to the first and most brilliant physical principle these engineers employed, a principle that modern dams so often ignore. The first principle was to let the landscape do the work. Ancient engineers possessed an almost intuitive ability to read the subtle language of the earth. They did not see a barren valley, they saw a potential bowl. They did not see a rocky slope, they saw a natural aqueduct. Their genius lay in identifying and enhancing the natural pathways that water itself had carved over millennia. They would find a gentle depression in the land, a place where rainwater already naturally pooled during a rare storm. Then, with astonishing precision, they would guide the water's journey. They built low walls of fitted stone along the contours of hillsides, not to block the water, but to gently persuade it. These walls would nudge the runoff from a wide area, funneling it slowly and efficiently into that waiting natural basin. This entire system was powered by a single, unwavering force, gravity. From the moment a raindrop hit the slope to the moment it settled into the reservoir, it was moving downhill, guided by a design that required no pumps, no electricity, and no moving parts to break. It was a silent, self-regulating machine built from the land itself. This stands in stark contrast to many modern reservoirs, which often begin by radically reshaping the terrain. Enormous valleys are cleared, hillsides are flattened, and rivers are forcibly diverted. This brute force approach does not just change the landscape. It can disrupt entire local ecosystems, sometimes creating new problems like erosion or sediment buildup that require constant, costly intervention. The ancient way was one of elegant efficiency, a collaboration that resulted in a resilient water network that could, and often did, operate flawlessly for centuries. And this clever use of gravity to gather water was only half the story. Once the water was collected, they faced an even greater adversary, the relentless, evaporating power of the desert sun. The desert sun is a relentless thief of water. Ancient builders understood this enemy intimately, and their second principle was a masterclass in passive defense. Instead of fighting evaporation with energy, they outsmarted it with geometry and shade. They knew that a wide, shallow pond would surrender its water to the sky in a matter of days. So they designed their reservoirs to be narrow and profoundly deep, dramatically shrinking the surface area exposed to the air. Think of a tall, slender vase compared to a flat dinner plate left out in the sun. The water in the vase lasts far longer because so little of it is touching the hot, dry air. This simple but brilliant concept of minimizing the surface was just the beginning. They took this further by building down, not just up. Many reservoirs were carved partially underground, using the cool, insulating earth as a natural barrier. Above them, they constructed clever shade. The magnificent stepwells of India are the ultimate expression of this. Their intricate, stepped sides are not merely decorative. They function as a constantly shifting canopy. As the sun moves across the sky, the towering, sculpted walls cast deep, cooling shadows over the water's surface, turning the entire structure into a self-shading marvel. Some cultures went even further, weaving floating covers from reeds or planting trees strategically to block the afternoon sun. All of these methods required zero electricity and zero chemical treatments. They were sustainable solutions born from close observation. Modern reservoirs, by contrast, are often vast, open bowls of water, fully exposed to the elements. They can lose staggering amounts of water to pure evaporation, a loss that sometimes requires expensive pumps or chemical films to mitigate. The ancient approach was one of elegant efficiency, a quiet victory over a formidable foe. And this brilliant strategy of evaporation control was made possible by the third, and perhaps most surprising, principle, the secret ingredient hidden in their walls. Those ancient walls were far more than simple containers. They were living, breathing systems, and their true magic lay in the materials from which they were built. Ancient engineers understood that importing foreign substances was a sign of weakness, not strength. Their third principle was to use what the land itself provided, transforming local earth, stone, and lime into something far greater than the sum of their parts. They did not just build with clay, they mastered it. They discovered that by mixing local lime with water, sand, and sometimes secret organic additives like plant juices, animal fats, or even cactus extracts, they could create a plaster with almost miraculous properties. This was not a simple glue. It was an active component in the reservoir's health. One of its most remarkable features was its ability to breathe. Unlike modern concrete, which forms a hard, impermeable seal, these traditional plasters were slightly porous. This subtle quality allowed minuscule amounts of moisture to seep in and out of the wall, which acted like a pressure release valve. When the desert sun beat down on the reservoir, expanding the materials, or when the cold night air caused them to contract, the flexible, breathable plaster could handle this constant movement without cracking apart. Even when small cracks did form, a fascinating self-healing process could begin. Water seeping into a crack would react with unused lime in the plaster, forming new crystals that would slowly grow and seal the fissure shut. The structure could literally repair itself over time. Modern concrete, for all its immense strength, behaves very differently. It is a rigid, brittle material. Under the extreme temperature swings of the desert, it cannot flex. It can only crack, and once a crack forms, it typically grows, requiring constant and costly human intervention to fix. The ancient approach created a resilient partnership with the environment, while the modern one often creates a brittle battle against it. This intelligent use of local materials also wove the reservoir directly into the fabric of the community and the local economy. There were no massive supply chains trucking in materials from thousands of miles away. The stones came from a nearby quarry. The lime was baked in a local kiln. The special additives were derived from local plants. This created a circular system where the knowledge and the resources for both building and repairing the structure remained within the community. Everyone had a stake in its survival, and everyone possessed the local knowledge to maintain it. This stands in stark contrast to a modern concrete dam, which often relies on specialized engineers and imported materials, making long-term maintenance a complex, expensive, and sometimes impossible task. The ancient way was not just about building a reservoir, it was about cultivating a lasting relationship between people, their knowledge, and their landscape. And this profound understanding of materials extended beyond the walls themselves, into the very water they held, where they employed a fourth principle of natural purification that put our modern chemical treatments to shame. The water held within these ancient reservoirs was not merely stored, it was kept alive. The fourth principle reveals that these structures were not sterile tanks but carefully managed ecosystems. Ancient engineers understood that the clearest, healthiest water was not found in a void, but in a balanced, living environment. They deliberately designed specific zones within their reservoirs for aquatic plants like reeds and lilies, and they introduced certain species of fish that thrived on algae and organic debris. In the Stepwells of India, this was a core part of the design. As you descended the ornate steps, you would pass through different levels, some of which were not just for drawing water, but were dedicated to this natural purification process. The plants would filter out impurities with their roots, while the fish would constantly graze, preventing any scum from forming on the water's surface. This created a multi-stage, self-regulating cleaning system that operated silently and continuously, year after year. This is a powerful form of biomimicry, copying the way a healthy pond or wetland naturally purifies itself. It provided a constant, zero-cost method of water treatment that required no chemicals, no electricity, and no human operators. There were no filters to replace and no machines to break down. The system was inherently resilient. Compare this to the modern approach, where water collection and water treatment are almost always separate. We build massive reservoirs to hold raw, untreated water, and then we must pump that water to a distant, energy-hungry treatment plant. That plant relies on complex machinery and a constant supply of chemicals to achieve what the ancient reservoir did through simple biology. The ancient method created a symbiotic relationship with nature, where the health of the water and the health of the ecosystem were one and the same. This holistic thinking even extended to handling the one thing that plagues every water system: the slow, inevitable accumulation of silt and sediment. Silt is the silent killer of reservoirs. While a modern dam might face catastrophic failure in a dramatic instant, it is the slow, patient accumulation of sediment that truly seals its fate over decades. Ancient engineers knew this enemy well, and their fifth principle was a masterstroke of proactive design. They did not simply build a container for water. They built a system that actively managed its own cleanliness. At the very mouths of their water channels, right where runoff entered the reservoir, they constructed clever silt traps and settling chambers. These were not complex machines. They were simply widened, shallow pools designed to slow the incoming water's flow. As the water slowed, it lost its energy, and the heavy particles of sand, soil, and debris it carried would naturally sink to the bottom, unable to travel any further. Only the clearer, lighter water would then continue its journey into the main storage area. This was a brilliant first line of defense, catching the majority of the sediment before it could even become a problem. But they did not stop there. The very shape of the reservoir itself was part of the cleaning strategy. Many were designed with a conical or gently sloping bowl-like floor. This geometry was not accidental. During periods of low water, any fine sediment that had made it past the initial traps would naturally be guided by gravity to settle in the very deepest central point of the reservoir. This created a single, concentrated pile of silt waiting for the community's periodic maintenance. When the time came to clean, it was a straightforward task. People did not have to dredge the entire vast floor. They only needed to focus their efforts on that one central collection point, scooping out the accumulated muck, which could then be used as rich fertilizer for their fields. This turned a maintenance chore into a beneficial part of the agricultural cycle. Some cultures took this even further, designing their systems to harness the power of nature's own cleaning cycle. They incorporated specially designed outlets that could be opened during seasonal floods. The immense force of the incoming floodwaters would then rush through the reservoir, acting like a giant broom and flushing the accumulated silt right back out through these dedicated channels. This was a system that used a problem, flooding, to solve another problem, siltation. The contrast with modern dams is stark. Today, siltation is often a deferred crisis. Sediment builds up relentlessly in the vast, flat-bottomed basins behind massive dams, slowly but surely reducing their water-holding capacity. dealing with it is a Herculean task. Dredging is astronomically expensive and complex, and draining the entire reservoir for cleaning is often politically and economically unthinkable. The ancient approach, by designing for easy maintenance from the very beginning, ensured the structure's longevity was built into its blueprint. This foresight extended beyond what they built on the surface, deep into a hidden, underground world where their reservoirs formed a symbiotic relationship with the earth itself. The most brilliant aspect of these ancient systems often lay completely out of sight. They understood that the real treasure was not just the water you could see, but the water you could not. Their sixth principle was one of profound synergy, connecting their surface structures directly to the vast, hidden oceans of the underground. These reservoirs were not dead-end tanks. They were living, breathing gateways designed to actively replenish the groundwater aquifers deep beneath the sand. The porous, breathable materials of their floors and walls were not a flaw. They were the entire point. Water would slowly, patiently percolate down through these layers, a constant, gentle trickle feeding the thirsty water table below. This process transformed the entire reservoir into a recharge station, a place where a single season of rain could be converted into a multi-year underground reserve. Storing water deep in the earth was the ultimate preservation strategy. It was a natural safe protected from the evaporating sun and far less vulnerable to contamination. This created a beautifully resilient dual-source water supply. During the wet season, the community could draw directly from the surface reservoir. Then, when the surface water was gone after months of drought, they could turn to their wells, tapping into that very same groundwater reserve that their own reservoir had helped to create and sustain. It was a closed, sustainable loop. The structure gave to the earth, and the earth, in return, gave back to the people. This stands in direct opposition to the modern approach of lining reservoirs with impermeable concrete or plastic. That liner acts like a raincoat on the landscape. It effectively seals the aquifer off from the sky, preventing any of the collected water from rejoining the underground system. This disrupts the natural hydrological cycle, often lowering the local water table and starving the very land that the reservoir was meant to serve. The ancient method was one of addition and enrichment, while the modern one can be one of isolation and subtraction. This holistic understanding of the entire water cycle, from cloud to aquifer, was not just a technical achievement. It was a philosophy that was woven directly into the social fabric of these civilizations, governing how they organized themselves around this most precious resource. That sense of shared responsibility was the invisible mortar that held these stone and clay structures together for centuries. A reservoir was not just a piece of infrastructure owned by a distant authority. It belonged to the village, the clan, the entire community. This created a powerful, self-policing system of care. Every family understood their role, their rights, and their duties. Perhaps one family was responsible for cleaning a specific section of the inlet channel each year after the harvest. Another might be tasked with inspecting the plaster walls for cracks before the rainy season. These rules were not written in a manual locked in an office. They were passed down through stories, songs, and rituals, becoming an inseparable part of the local culture. Because everyone drank from the same water, everyone had a direct personal stake in its purity and availability. Neglecting your maintenance duty was not just a violation of a rule. It was a betrayal of your neighbors and your own children's future. This decentralized model of knowledge was equally vital. The engineering wisdom was not held by a single expert. Instead, it was distributed across the community. The elder who could read the subtle signs of silt buildup, the mason who knew the exact recipe for the self-healing plaster, the farmer who understood the flow patterns of the watershed. these individuals all held crucial pieces of the puzzle. If one person moved away or passed on, the knowledge remained embedded in the collective memory of the people. This made the system incredibly resilient to shocks. Even if a war or a famine disrupted the social order, the core understanding of how to care for the water source survived, allowing the community to rebuild. We can see this powerful social fabric in action across the ancient world. In the arid landscapes of Oman, the Aflaj channel systems are still governed by a precise water-sharing schedule measured by the position of the sun and stars, with a community-appointed guardian, the Wakil, overseeing fair distribution. In the Stepwells of Rajasthan, India, entire villages would gather for the annual cleaning, a festival-like event that blended hard work with celebration, reinforcing the bond between the people and their life source. Compare this to the modern reality. A massive dam is often managed by a government agency hundreds of miles away. The people who live downstream and rely on its water have no direct say in its operation, no personal responsibility for its upkeep, and often no access to the specialized knowledge needed to fix it. This disconnect between the user and the manager is a profound weakness. When a pipe bursts or a leak appears, the response is not an immediate communal effort. It is a slow, bureaucratic process of filing reports and waiting for a work order. The ancient system was maintained by 1,000 caring eyes and hands. The modern one too often relies on a single, overstretched, and distant manager. This highlights a final, crucial principle that separated their success from our frequent struggles, a principle that goes beyond engineering and into the very heart of how we perceive time itself. Perhaps the ultimate expression of this ancient wisdom is found deep beneath the sands of Persia. Here, engineers did not build reservoirs to hold water. They built arteries to summon it. The Qanat system was a hydrological masterpiece, a network of underground tunnels that breathed life into the heart of the desert. It began with a mother well, dug deep into an alluvial fan at the base of a mountain range, where it could tap into a hidden aquifer fed by distant rainfall. From this well, the builders began their most daring work. They dug a gently sloping tunnel, just large enough for a person to crawl through, that would carry the water for miles, sometimes dozens of miles across the parched landscape. The slope was everything, a calculation of breathtaking precision. It had to be steep enough to let the water flow by gravity alone, yet shallow enough to prevent it from gaining destructive speed and eroding the tunnel walls. This was engineering without lasers or computers, guided by generations of accumulated knowledge and a deep feel for the land. The result was a subterranean river, a permanent, self-regulating flow of water that appeared as if by magic in the most unlikely places. Along the entire length of the tunnel, builders dug a series of vertical shafts down to the tunnel floor. These were not for drawing water. They were the system's lungs and its maintenance hatches. They provided crucial ventilation for the workers who dug the tunnel by hand, and for centuries after, they served as access points for the community to descend and clear out silt or repair collapses. This design ensured the Qanat could be maintained in sections, a task that became a communal ritual passed from father to son. Because the water flowed entirely underground, it was completely shielded from the evaporating sun. Not a single drop was lost to the thirsty sky, and as it traveled through the soil, the earth itself acted as a natural filter, straining out impurities and delivering clean, cool water to the surface. The Qanat did not simply provide a resource, it created civilization. At the point where the tunnel finally emerged onto the surface, a vibrant linear oasis would bloom. Settlements, farms, and lush gardens grew along this man-made vein of life, transforming barren land into a habitable paradise. This was not a brute force extraction of water. It was a graceful, sustained partnership with the hidden rhythms of the earth, a low-tech solution of such profound intelligence that its principles still resonate today, from the Persian plateau to the stepwells of India. Descending into a stepwell is like walking into an inverted palace. These are not holes in the ground but monumental achievements carved directly into the earth, where every architectural choice served a vital hydrological purpose. The sheer scale is staggering, with some stepwells descending over 10 stories deep, a labyrinth of steps and landings reaching down towards the water table. This was not an extravagant design. It was a direct and brilliant response to a harsh reality. In the arid climates of Gujarat and Rajasthan, the water level could drop dramatically between the monsoon season and the peak of the dry summer. A simple, vertical well would become useless, its life-giving water retreating far beyond the reach of any bucket. But the stepwell's cascading staircase was a solution of pure genius. As the water receded, the community simply had to walk down a few more steps. The well never ran dry because access to the water was guaranteed, no matter how low it fell. This design transformed the arduous daily chore of collecting water into a manageable, even social, descent. But the steps were only one part of a complex environmental machine. The entire structure was engineered to create a cool, stable microclimate deep underground. The towering walls, often adorned with hundreds of intricately carved pillars and niches, were not just for beauty. They acted as a massive thermal mass, absorbing the cool of the night and slowly releasing it throughout the scorching day. The intricate carvings and open colonnades were precisely calculated to manage airflow, allowing hot air to rise and escape while trapping cooler air below. This constant natural air conditioning had a direct and powerful effect on the water itself. By keeping the air in the well significantly cooler than the outside desert heat, evaporation was dramatically slowed. The water was preserved not by a chemical or a machine, but by the very shape and substance of the architecture. This was a space that served the community in multiple ways simultaneously. It was a dependable water source, a cool refuge from the oppressive heat, a bustling town square where news was exchanged, and a sacred temple for prayer and meditation. The stepwell was the heart of the village, both physically and socially. Its multifunctional nature meant that people were drawn to it every single day, ensuring that its condition was constantly monitored and any minor repairs were addressed immediately. This stands in such contrast to our modern, single-purpose infrastructure, where a remote water treatment plant is just a utility, out of sight and out of mind. The stepwell's enduring legacy shows that the most resilient systems are those woven directly into the daily life and culture of the people they serve. This sophisticated fusion of community, art, and engineering in one of the world's driest regions proves that ancient wisdom was both profound and widespread. A similar yet distinct brilliance was emerging on the other side of the world, in the soaring mountains of South America. High in the jungles of the Americas, the Maya were building their own kind of water empire. Their challenge was not a vast, open desert, but the unpredictable rhythm of the tropical seasons, where months of heavy rain were followed by periods of intense drought. To support immense city-states with tens of thousands of people, they could not rely on chance. They engineered entire urban landscapes to capture and control every drop. The sprawling stone plazas and paved courtyards of their cities were not merely for ceremony. They were giant, sloped catchment basins. When the rains came, these impermeable surfaces channeled water into a complex network of stone-lined canals and aqueducts, directing the flow toward massive, centrally located reservoirs. They turned their own architecture into a watershed. The reservoirs themselves were marvels of sealing technology. Knowing the porous limestone bedrock would drink their precious water, the Maya engineered a perfect barrier. They paved the bottoms and sides of their reservoirs with a thick, watertight plaster made from local clay and burned lime. This created a sealed tank right in the heart of the city, a technological feat that allowed them to store millions of gallons of rainwater to last through the dry months. But their genius did not stop at simple storage. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of something even more advanced. At the Corriental Reservoir in the city of Tikal, researchers found a system that used crystalline quartz and zeolite, a volcanic mineral with a natural, honeycomb-like structure. This mineral is a powerful natural filter capable of trapping harmful bacteria, toxic heavy metals, and other contaminants. The Maya were not just storing water. They were purifying it, creating a public water supply that was clean and safe for their dense urban population, a concept we often think of as exclusively modern. This global perspective is staggering. From the underground Qanats of Persia to the Stepwells of India and now the filtered reservoirs of the Maya, we see a common thread. These were not primitive attempts. They were highly sophisticated, locally adapted solutions born from a deep, observant relationship with a specific environment. Each culture, facing its own unique water crisis, arrived at a set of core principles that mirror one another. They gathered water using gravity, stored it with smart geometry and local materials, purified it with natural systems, and designed every component for easy, communal maintenance. They saw water as part of a cycle, not an endpoint. This stands in such stark contrast to the modern, one-size-fits-all model that often relies on energy-intensive pumps, chemical treatments, and brittle, high-cost materials. The ancient way was resilient, adaptive, and built to last for generations. It makes you wonder what we have lost in our rush toward technological complexity. This modern paradigm of water management emerged from an industrial age that worshipped scale and central control. Where ancient societies built many small, connected reservoirs, we now build a single, colossal dam. The goal is no longer just community survival, but regional power, literally and figuratively. Massive hydroelectric turbines are bolted into these structures, transforming the gentle force of a flowing river into a torrent of electricity. This dual purpose of water storage and power generation seems like an ultimate efficiency, a triumph of human ingenuity, but this very ambition introduces profound fragilities. The system becomes a monolith, a single point of failure. A mechanical fault in a turbine hall, a crack in the immense concrete wall, or a sabotage of the control systems can bring the entire water and power supply for millions to a sudden halt. The ancient network of Qanats and stepwells had built-in redundancy. If one channel silted up or one well needed repair, the others continued to function. The modern megadam has no backup, it is all or nothing. This centralized model also demands a new kind of material, one that can be poured and shaped on an unprecedented scale. That material is modern concrete. It is the ultimate symbol of industrial might, a substance mixed in giant trucks and laid down in continuous, monolithic slabs. Its strength is immense, capable of holding back the weight of an entire man-made lake. But this strength is brittle. Concrete cannot breathe or flex like the ancient lime plasters. Under the brutal expansion and contraction of desert temperature swings, it develops microfractures. Water seeps in, freezes, and expands, slowly but relentlessly prying the structure apart from within. The repair of a modern dam is not a community festival. It is a multi-million-dollar engineering project requiring specialized crews, heavy machinery, and lengthy shutdowns. The knowledge to fix it is not held by the local mason. It resides with a handful of expert firms, often thousands of miles away. And then there is the social and ecological cost, a ripple effect that ancient engineers would have found horrifying. To create a massive reservoir, you must first destroy a valley. Towns that have stood for generations are submerged, their communities scattered. Fertile farmlands and ancient forests vanish beneath the rising water. The river itself, the lifeblood of the region, is choked into a stagnant lake. Downstream, ecosystems that evolved to depend on seasonal floods begin to starve. The sediment that once nourished floodplains now settles uselessly behind the dam, slowly filling the reservoir it was meant to supply. The river delta, no longer receiving its annual gift of silt, begins to erode, surrendering land to the sea. The goal shifts from integration with the landscape to its complete subjugation. We no longer ask how we can work with the water cycle. We demand that the water cycle work for us. This shift in philosophy from partner to master has delivered immense short-term power, but at what long-term price? The numbers themselves tell a stark story of efficiency lost. A modern, open-air reservoir baking under the desert sun can surrender a staggering 70% of its stored water to the atmosphere every single year. Picture that for a moment. For every 10 gallons painstakingly collected and stored, 7 simply vanish into thin air. Now, place that same volume of water into an ancient, subterranean stepwell or a deep, shaded cistern. The annual loss plummets to perhaps 10 or 20%. This is not a marginal improvement. It is the fundamental difference between a water supply that endures a long drought and one that disappears before the summer is over. This catastrophic evaporation from modern dams is not a minor oversight. It is a critical design flaw that makes them profoundly unsuited for the arid environments where we often build them. The ancient advantage extends beyond mere conservation. Consider the hidden energy cost of all that vanished water. In a modern system, that water was first pumped, often using fossil fuels from a distant source. It was then treated with energy-intensive processes to make it safe. To lose 70% of it to evaporation is to waste 70% of all that embedded energy and investment, a devastatingly inefficient cycle. Ancient systems broke this cycle completely. They moved water with gravity, purified it with biology, and stored it with geometry, creating a closed loop that demanded zero external power. When you line up the two models side by side, the comparison on efficiency alone is brutal. One system hemorrhages a precious resource, while the other guards it jealously. This quantitative disadvantage forces a difficult question. Why do we continue to build water systems in deserts that are fundamentally designed to fail in them? This contrast in maintenance reveals a deeper vulnerability in our entire approach. Ancient reservoirs were built to be cared for, not just used. Their design philosophy centered on accessibility. A silt trap was not a complex machine but a widened, shallow pool that anyone with a shovel could clear in an afternoon. A cracked plaster wall could be repaired by a local mason who knew the recipe, mixing lime from the village kiln with sand from the riverbed. The entire system operated on a principle of local competence. The knowledge and the tools needed to keep it running were never more than a day's walk away. This created an infrastructure that was inherently sustainable because its upkeep was woven into the local economy and skill set. It was maintained by the very people who depended on it for their lives, which meant minor issues were fixed long before they could become major catastrophes. The system's simplicity was its greatest strength, a form of built-in resilience that guaranteed its survival across generations. Now hold that thought and look at a modern dam. Its maintenance is a spectacle of complexity. It relies on specialized, remotely operated vehicles to inspect the underwater structures, teams of geotechnical engineers to analyze core samples for structural integrity, and expert divers to repair massive underwater valves. The control room is a maze of computerized systems monitoring pressure sensors and flow rates. There is no single person, not even a small community, that holds all the knowledge required to keep it functioning. This creates a critical dependency. When government budgets tighten or a specialized engineering firm is unavailable, essential maintenance gets deferred. A small leak is ignored because addressing it requires a multi-million-dollar contract. A sediment buildup is logged as a problem for the next administration. This is how systems decay from the inside out, not with a sudden collapse, but with a slow, quiet accumulation of neglected tasks. The ancient reservoir was a living part of the community, repaired with local materials and collective effort. The modern dam is a distant monolith managed by spreadsheet and bureaucracy. This fundamental difference in who can fix the system and how easily may be the single greatest threat to our water security. It is a conundrum we have built for ourselves, trading resilient simplicity for fragile complexity. The environmental legacy of these two approaches could not be more different. A modern megadam begins its life with an act of profound ecological violence. An entire river valley, a complex ecosystem that has evolved over millennia, is deliberately drowned. Ancient forests are submerged, their trees becoming submerged skeletons. Fertile farmland that fed generations is lost forever under the rising water. The communities of people and animals who called that valley home are permanently displaced, their world erased to create a vast, artificial lake. But the disruption does not stop at the shoreline. Downstream, the entire rhythm of the river is broken. The river no longer experiences its natural seasonal floods, which once spread nutrient-rich silt across the floodplains, renewing the soil and triggering fish spawning cycles. That life-giving sediment now settles uselessly behind the dam, slowly filling the reservoir. The river downstream becomes starved and clear, its banks beginning to erode, and its delta, no longer replenished with silt, starts to shrink, surrendering land to the sea. This is an interruption of a fundamental planetary cycle, and the consequences ripple through the environment for hundreds of miles. Ancient reservoirs took the opposite path. They were not impositions on the landscape but subtle enhancements of it. By recharging the groundwater, they created a stable, underground reservoir that fed springs and kept river flows more consistent during dry periods, supporting the existing ecosystem rather than replacing it. A stepwell or a Qanat did not flood a valley. It created a linear oasis, a corridor of life where trees could grow and animals could drink, enriching the local biodiversity. These structures worked in concert with the natural water cycle, catching the rain's gift and sharing it slowly and generously with the land around it. Even their construction was inherently sustainable. The stones were quarried locally, the lime was burned in a nearby kiln, and the clay was dug from the riverbank. This process created almost no carbon footprint, especially when you consider the alternative. The production of modern concrete is one of the largest single sources of carbon emissions on the planet, and transporting thousands of tons of it to a remote dam site burns vast quantities of fossil fuels. The ancient reservoir was built from the land for the land, with a light touch that left the ecosystem not just intact, but healthier and more resilient. This stark contrast in environmental philosophy is not merely a historical curiosity. It is a vital lesson for our future, as we face the immense challenges of climate change and water scarcity. The ancient model offers a more harmonious path forward, one that asks how we can enhance the world rather than dominate it. The true price of a modern dam is not paid when the concrete is poured. That initial construction bill, as enormous as it is, represents only the first installment. The real, relentless expense begins the moment the reservoir starts to fill. It is the continuous hum of electric pumps moving water to treatment plants. It is the constant procurement of chemical coagulants and disinfectants to keep the water safe. It is the multi-million-dollar contracts for specialized engineers to address the inevitable cracks in the brittle concrete. It is the endless, costly projects to mitigate the environmental damage the dam itself caused, from trying to save downstream fish populations to managing the toxic algae blooms in the stagnant water. This is a financial treadmill, a system designed to consume money and energy in perpetuity just to keep itself from failing. Now, place that model beside an ancient stepwell or a Qanat system. After the community completed the initial, labor-intensive construction, the ongoing costs plummeted to nearly zero. The system was powered by gravity, not gigawatts. It was purified by aquatic ecosystems, not chlorine factories. Its maintenance was a communal ritual, performed with local materials and knowledge, not an invoice from an international engineering firm. This creates a staggering divergence in long-term value. A structure that functions for 50 years before requiring a ruinously expensive refurbishment is not in the same economic category as one that operates for 1,000 years with only minor, local upkeep. When you divide the initial effort by centuries of uninterrupted service, the cost per year of an ancient reservoir becomes almost negligible. Our modern accounting is tragically short-sighted. We focus on the upfront capital cost while ignoring the lifetime liabilities. We see the community building a Qanat for decades and call it inefficient, without calculating that its gift of water will flow for a millennium. We see a concrete dam built in 5 years and call it a triumph, while ignoring the century of expensive maintenance and environmental debt we have just created for our grandchildren. This flawed math becomes even more pronounced when we factor in the costs we routinely ignore. What is the economic value of a drowned forest, a displaced village, or a fishery that has collapsed? Modern cost-benefit analyzers often treat these as externalities, numbers that can be pushed to the side. But for the ancient engineers, these were the very things their designs were meant to preserve. Their economic model was inherently holistic, valuing the health of the entire community and its environment as a core asset. This is not a call to tear down every dam and abandon technology. It is a powerful argument for changing how we measure success. What if we judged a water project not by how cheaply it can be built, but by how inexpensively it can be maintained for 500 years? What if we valued designs that create social cohesion and ecological health, instead of ones that simply move the largest volume of water for the lowest initial bid? The ancient world offers us this profound economic wisdom, a lens that reveals the devastating hidden expenses of our modern shortcuts and champions the timeless value of building in partnership with the earth. This loss of knowledge was not an accident of history, but a direct casualty of our march toward progress. As societies industrialized and centralized, the intricate relationship between a community and its water source was severed. The practical wisdom of how to mix the self-healing plaster, when to clear the silt traps after the first rain, and which elder could read the watershed's subtle signs was no longer vital for daily survival. This specialized knowledge, passed from parent to child through hands-on practice, faded away within a generation or two. It was not written down in manuals because it was a living craft, an oral tradition woven into the very rituals of community life. When that life changed, the thread was broken. The result is a profound cultural amnesia. We lost more than just techniques. We lost a deep, place-based intelligence, a generational understanding of a specific valley's geology, a particular region's rainfall patterns, and a local ecosystem's delicate balance. This was not generic engineering. It was a hyper-localized dialogue with the land, and we have largely forgotten the language. Modern engineering education, for all its strengths, often replaces this intimate, local knowledge with standardized global principles. A dam design that works in one climate is applied to another with wildly different conditions because the formulas in the textbook are the same. This efficiency in education comes at a cost, sometimes stripping away the essential context of place that made the ancient systems so resilient. What we are facing today is not just a water crisis, but a crisis of memory. The revival of these ancient methods is not about romanticizing the past. It is a desperate and practical act of recovering a toolkit for survival. Around the world, from the dry lands of India to the American Southwest, engineers and communities are now collaborating with historians and archaeologists, not to copy these old designs exactly, but to decode their underlying principles. They are asking what these structures can teach us about working with gravity, about using local materials, and about designing for a community's care. This is not nostalgia. It is a strategic effort to rebuild our resilience from the ground up, stitching together the frayed threads of a wisdom we cannot afford to lose again. The silent stones of these ancient reservoirs are finally beginning to speak. Using tools their original builders could never have conceived, modern archaeologists are listening. Satellite imaging now peers through layers of sand and time, revealing the ghostly outlines of entire hydraulic networks etched into the landscape. From high above, the patterns become clear, showing how Qanat lines stretched for dozens of miles, connecting mountain aquifers to distant oases in a web of life. This is more than just mapping. It is a form of technological resurrection, bringing lost hydroscapes back into view. On the ground, the investigation gets even more intimate. Scientists take core samples from the bottom of a silted-up reservoir, reading the layers of sediment like a history book. Each stratum tells a story of rainfall, of drought, and of the slow accumulation that eventually filled the basin. This data reveals not just when the reservoir was built, but how it was managed over centuries, and precisely why it finally fell into disuse. The most profound insights, however, are coming from the materials themselves. With electron microscopes, researchers analyze the microstructure of a 2,000-year-old plaster. They are discovering that the secret was not one single ingredient, but a complex, localized recipe. In one region, the plaster might contain cactus sap for flexibility. In another, rice husks or animal fats were added to create microscopic air pockets that helped the material breathe. This was not primitive guesswork. It was materials science of the highest order, tailored perfectly to the local environment. This fusion of past and present is creating a powerful new hybrid knowledge. We are no longer just admiring ancient ingenuity. We are reverse engineering it. The data from a satellite image and a sediment core provides tangible, quantifiable evidence that contemporary engineers can use. It moves the discussion from romantic speculation to hard engineering principles. This research is proving that these methods were not just sustainable. They were hyper-efficient, resilient systems honed by generations of trial and error. The bridge between ancient wisdom and modern need is now being built, and it is leading to some of the most innovative water projects in the world today. That ancient wisdom is now sparking a quiet revolution in modern engineering. A field known as biomimicry is learning to copy not just nature, but also the brilliant adaptations of our ancestors. Today's innovators are looking at the Stepwells' self-shading architecture and asking how they can replicate that cooling effect for our own reservoirs. The answers are both simple and ingenious. In some of the world's hottest regions, you can now see vast shade nets stretched over open water, acting like a giant sun hat to dramatically cut evaporation. Other projects are experimenting with floating solar panel arrays. These do double duty, generating clean electricity while simultaneously casting a protective shadow over the water surface, mimicking the stepwell's carved canopy on a massive modern scale. This is not a rejection of technology, but a smarter application of it, using modern materials to achieve an ancient goal. The same principle applies to water purification. Instead of relying solely on chemical plants, engineers are building what they call constructed wetlands. These are carefully engineered marshes, complete with specific plants, gravel beds, and microbes that naturally filter pollutants from wastewater. It is the same living filtration system used in the stepwells and Mayan reservoirs, but scaled for an entire city. The water slowly flows through these green, plant-filled areas, emerging cleaner and clearer, all without the constant need for energy-intensive machinery. Perhaps the most ambitious application of this old-new thinking is the concept of the sponge city. This urban design philosophy aims to undo the damage of concrete and asphalt, turning entire metropolitan areas into giant, porous landscapes that function like the ancient reservoirs of old. Instead of channeling rainwater into storm drains as quickly as possible, sponge cities use permeable pavements, green roofs, and sunken gardens to capture rainfall where it lands. The goal is to let that water seep back into the earth, actively recharging the groundwater just as the porous floors of ancient cisterns did. These are not isolated experiments. They represent a fundamental shift in perspective, proving that the old ways are not obsolete relics. They are a deep well of innovative, sustainable solutions perfectly suited for the challenges of the 21st century. The most promising path forward is not a choice between the past and the present, but a fusion of ancient intelligence with modern tools. Yet for all their brilliance, these ancient-inspired solutions face a formidable modern barrier. Our current systems of governance and policy are often stacked against them. To move from inspiring pilot projects to a transformed water landscape, we need more than just new engineering. We need new rules. The ancient model thrived because management was local, responsive, and deeply invested. A village managed its stepwell, a clan maintained its Qanat. This stands in stark contrast to today's top-down, centralized water authorities, where decisions made in a distant capital dictate the fate of a river hundreds of miles away. The first and most crucial policy shift is to deliberately re-empower local communities. This means legally recognizing their right to manage local water catchments, giving them the authority to maintain ancient systems that have been revived, and supporting the formation of new water user associations. It is about trusting the people who have the most to lose if the system fails, and the most to gain if it succeeds. Governments hold the next key, the power of the purse. They can use procurement policies and tax incentives to fundamentally change what gets built. Instead of always awarding contracts to the lowest bidder for concrete-intensive projects, what if they gave preferential treatment to designs that use local, sustainable materials and actively recharge groundwater? A national building code could be updated to mandate rainwater harvesting and groundwater recharge for new developments in arid regions, turning every building into a mini reservoir, just as the ancient landscapes functioned. Perhaps the most contentious yet vital reform lies in how we value water. Our current pricing and water rights systems are often relics of a bygone era of perceived plenty. They encourage waste and discourage conservation. Ancient societies understood water's profound value because their survival depended on it. Our policies must reflect that same urgency. This does not simply mean making water more expensive for the poor. It means creating smart, tiered pricing that rewards those who use water wisely and penalizes excessive waste. It means reforming antiquated water rights that grant ownership of a river in perpetuity, rights that often ignore the needs of the ecosystem itself. The ultimate goal is to weave these historical principles into the very fabric of our environmental regulations. The ancient standard of leaving a water system healthier for the next generation should become a legal requirement, not just an ideal. Without this comprehensive policy shift, the most brilliant, ancient-inspired project will remain a beautiful oasis in a desert of outdated practice. The hard truth is that our institutions have become as brittle as our concrete. Updating them is the real engineering challenge of our time. But can these elegant, small-scale solutions possibly work for a megacity of 20 million people? It is a powerful and common critique, suggesting that ancient wisdom is charming but ultimately inadequate for our modern scale. The answer, however, is not to choose between one colossal dam and 10,000 tiny wells. The most promising path forward is a hybrid model, a system that layers ancient principles with modern infrastructure to create something entirely new. Imagine a modern metropolis not as a single, thirsty giant, but as a network of smaller, interconnected water districts. Each district would have its own local heart, a revitalized river, a series of underground cisterns, and widespread rainwater harvesting that constantly recharges the local aquifer. This distributed network would handle the bulk of the city's non-potable water needs for things like irrigation, industrial cooling, and toilet flushing. Then, for the essential supply of drinking water, the larger, centralized infrastructure would still exist, but it would be freed from having to carry the entire crushing load. This hybrid approach captures the best of both worlds. The resilience of decentralization meets the reliable output of centralization. The ancient principle at work here is not a rejection of scale, but a redefinition of it. It is about optimizing for efficiency and resilience at every single level, from the individual building to the entire region. A city built on this model would be far less vulnerable. A single pipe break or a treatment plant failure would not threaten a city-wide crisis because each district would have its own local buffer, its own water security. This is the distributed intelligence of the ancient Qanat network, but applied to a 21st century urban landscape. The goal is not to dismantle our existing systems overnight, but to gradually re-engineer our cities to function more like a natural watershed, where water is collected, stored, and purified at the smallest possible scale before it is ever needed. This shift from a brittle, centralized monolith to a resilient, interconnected web may be the single most important step we can take to secure our water future. The coming era of climate chaos is precisely what these ancient systems were built to survive. Modern infrastructure often fails at the extremes, buckling under both unprecedented drought and record-breaking deluge. But ancient reservoirs were engineered for this very reality, a world of scarcity punctuated by sudden, overwhelming abundance. Their design excels at capturing the erratic downpours that are becoming the new normal. When a year's worth of rain falls in a single violent storm, the wide, gentle catchment areas and silt traps of an ancient system can absorb the initial shock, slowing the torrent and guiding it efficiently into storage, while modern concrete channels might simply overflow. This passive, gravity-fed operation provides a critical layer of immunity. A hurricane can knock out a city's power grid for weeks, shutting down the electric pumps that move water from a modern reservoir to its treatment plant. But a Qanat continues to flow silently in the dark. A stepwell's steps remain accessible. Their function is completely divorced from the fragile networks of energy that our contemporary lives depend upon. This independence from external power is not a quaint feature. It is a fundamental form of security in an increasingly unstable world. The benefits extend deep beneath our feet. In coastal cities from Jakarta to Miami, a silent crisis is unfolding. As we pump too much water from underground aquifers, the ground itself begins to sink, a process called land subsidence. At the same time as the freshwater level drops, salt water from the ocean pushes inland, contaminating the remaining groundwater. Ancient systems offer a direct antidote to this twin threat. By deliberately recharging aquifers, they push freshwater back into the ground, raising the water table and acting as a hydraulic barrier against the invading saltwater. They literally help the land to rise again and keep it fresh. This makes them not just reservoirs, but active defenders against some of the most insidious impacts of climate change. In a future of rising seas and sinking coasts, this function could be the difference between a habitable city and an abandoned one. The brutal truth is that our complex, high-tech water grids are proving to be dangerously vulnerable to the very disruptions that climate change promises to deliver. The ancient model, with its elegant simplicity and profound resilience, is no longer just an historical alternative. It is a vital blueprint for building a water-secure future, a form of future-proofing written in stone and earth. These ancient desert reservoirs hold a mirror to our own world, reflecting a forgotten art of sustainable living. Their enduring success was no happy accident. It was the direct result of a conscious design philosophy, one that saw humanity as a partner to natural forces, not their master. This deep respect for gravity, sunlight, and local geology created systems that were not just built, but grown from the landscape itself. The comparison we have drawn is not a call to abandon modern engineering, but to enrich it. It is an invitation to learn from the past so we can build a future that is not only more technologically advanced, but also more intelligent and harmonious. The wisdom locked in these stones and tunnels is not a relic. It is a living library of solutions ready to be applied. We can adopt their strategies to slash evaporative losses from our own reservoirs, to restore our sinking aquifers, and to build water security that is woven into the fabric of our communities. The most profound innovation may be to look backward in order to move forward, blending the timeless insight of our ancestors with the powerful tools of our present. I would love to hear what you find most compelling about these ancient systems. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this journey into the lost wisdom of our world, subscribe for more.